Well, welcome to today's episode. Just want to give you a quick reminder that we have a Zoom Bible study every Monday night, 8:15 for college-age young adults. Great time to connect together, be encouraged and challenged from God's Word. If you are interested in that, we'd love to have you join us. You can message us or email us through our website to get the meeting ID and passcode and so forth. And also, I just want to mention thank you for those who have been emailing and reaching out and just sharing what an encouragement the podcast has been to you and to your life and how God is using it. That's greatly encouraging to me because as we record, I enjoy doing it, and God has been challenging my life. And we've done this podcast for years and just took a brand new direction beginning of the year. And it seems like God's really using that. But there's nobody that I'm looking at. And so when I get to hear from you, the listeners, those that God's allowing this to get to and is using that is greatly encouraging and really helps us to, continue going on. And so if you ever have any concerns or encouragement or questions or anything, just feel free to reach out. We love to hear from you and interact with you. And so let's jump into our episode for today. We want to do this, stepping forward on borrowed faith. And so we have made, as youth leaders and college ministry leaders, this statement: you can't live on borrowed faith. I've said that I don't know how many times. We've said it to teens, we've said it to college-age young adults in Bible study and so forth. You can't live on borrowed faith. You can't live on your parents' faith. You can't live on your pastor, your youth or college pastor's faith. You have to have your own faith. And while there's great truth to this, my wife the other night in Bible study pointed out a thought I had never considered concerning this, and I want to look at it today. She said this: sometimes we need to borrow faith from another believer. Sometimes we just need to borrow faith in order to be able to keep going. And I had never thought about that. And as she said that, I began to think how that would apply to my life and apply to that statement. I always want to learn. As we do Bible study, I love to teach, but I also love to interject open-ended questions to try to get those people that are gathered together to share their thoughts, to share their perspective. And I learned so much, and this was one of those cases. We had already been in open discussion. I had already learned a few things. We were talking about faith, and we were looking at the sword. I mean, not the sword of the Spirit. So we're going through the armor of God in our Bible study, and we were looking at the shield of faith. And so we've been talking about that, and that's where this statement came from. And so let me read to you just real quick those verses in Ephesians chapter number 6. The Bible tells us we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places. Wherefore, take unto you the whole armor of God, that ye may be able to withstand in the evil day, and having done all to stand. Then he goes down and lists the armor. Stand therefore, having your loins girt about with truth, and having on the breastplate of righteousness, and your feet shod with the preparation of the gospel of peace. And he says this: above all, taking the shield of faith, wherewith you shall be able to quench all the fiery darts of the wicked. So above all there, just stating that this piece of armor is in preeminence. It is above all. You have to have it. It's essential. It's more important. Essentially all the other armor is ineffective without this piece. And so the shield connects it all together. As we begin to study that, there's a beautiful illustration about these shields with the Roman soldiers. This is when Paul was writing. It's what he was referring to. Their shields they're about 4 foot tall, 2 foot wide. Many times they're made of wood or covered with some type of leather or hard fabric, and they were made to interlock together. And so you could have hundreds or even thousands of Roman soldiers that could interlock their shields, and it makes this impenetrable wall where nobody can get through. And what a beautiful picture that is as you and I as believers stand together with our faith connected together. And when we stand together, how hard it is for the enemy to get through, and how we can build up and encourage one another and so forth. And so as we talk about this stepping forward on borrowed faith, I want to make sure that I'm clear. I'm not talking about that you can borrow faith to get in heaven, where you have to have your own faith in Jesus Christ in order to be saved or possess eternal life. What I'm talking about is believers who already have faith borrowing faith from someone else, borrowing faith just to take their next step. Yes, while we must have our own faith, there are times that we need to borrow someone else's faith just to get us through, just to carry us through. And I had never considered that as I've made this statement. So if we were being honest right now, really honest, we could say we don't always have it put together. We don't always have our faith in pristine condition, mint condition like that old muscle car. I used to collect baseball cards, and the value of that card is based on the condition. And if you had a card that was mint condition, didn't have any roughed edges or any scratches, bends, the value of it was so worth so much more than if it had some type of condition on it. And so we don't always have a strong faith, a growing faith. We want to as believers. I believe we really do, but sometimes we're just a mess. We don't have it all together. Sometimes we just can't even hardly face another day, hold our head up. It's all we can do to even smile. Our faith is so weak and we're not growing. We just try to put on a smile, go to church and put on that masquerade, just like everything's fine. But inside we're hurting, we're crippled, and doubts are flooding our mind. Can you identify right there? Well, I can. I can not even remember how many times my life has been like that, as my faith has struggled. There's times when, yes, my faith is growing and I feel strong and I sense God's presence. But then there's times when my faith is hurting and it's struggling and I just don't have it all together. And I want to take the next step and so forth. Just a complete wreck sometimes, right? And you feel like, how on earth could Jesus even use me? But you have someone. For me, many times it's been my wife. She's been there to help lift me up with what? Her faith. It's been my pastor who's been there, who's preaching, who's encouraging, who sends the text or whatever. It's his what? His faith. It's that friend or that post on social media of somebody else's faith that really encourages me, that really lifts me up, or really I can latch on to it. It's something I can grab a hold of, their faith, their encouragement, because they're strong, I'm weak, but I grab a hold or I borrow their faith in order to keep going forward. Or I really, if we're being honest, sometimes grab a hold or borrow that faith just to keep from drowning or just to keep from sinking further down in the hole that I already am. Just need a little bit of leverage, right, to get out. And sometimes it's that person's faith. And so, yeah, sometimes we need to step forward on borrowed faith. Now, we can't live there on somebody else's faith because it has to be our faith. But that is so very true that sometimes we need to borrow faith in order to get through or to take that next step. It sure can keep us from falling off, right? Just borrowing that faith. It sure can keep us from falling off, from taking 2, 3, 4, 5 steps backwards. It can encourage us. It can guide us. It can pull us along. It sure can help you take your next step. Think about this. The difference in us taking our next step may be determined by who we surround ourselves with. So the difference in us taking a step forward or sinking farther away, and our faith getting weaker and weaker and weaker, and doubts flooding more and more, could be the difference in who you and I surround ourselves with. Remember the picture of all those Roman soldiers? Imagine 5,000 soldiers surrounding a city with all their shields linked together. You have to understand, behind 5,000 shields, surely there's some people that aren't all there physically, mentally. But guess what? The others will sustain them. Imagine a group of 10 shields linked together. Surely all 10 you think would be there, but I'm sure a couple are struggling. Maybe they're tired, they're fatigued. But guess what? The strength of the others will fortify that wall, and they can borrow that strength. They can borrow that faith to get through. And that's how it is with our life. So how can we apply this? How can we our word, I'm going to remind ourselves, is the word intentional. That's our word for this year, and we have to be intentional. If anything's going to happen, it's not going to happen by accident. So how can we apply this? How can we be intentional with it? Well, do you have someone in your life that you can lean on, that you can borrow their faith when you need to, when those challenges arise? Someone who has faith you can borrow from if you get into a mess. Who is it? Maybe that person has already come to your mind. Well, then nurture that relationship. Make sure you foster that relationship. But if you don't have somebody that comes to mind, find someone that you can surround yourself with, that you can say, look, I know they're not perfect, and they may be in the same situation I am when I need their faith, but I see them and I see their faith and I see it strong and I see they're growing. And I see that's somebody that can really help me take my next step in my faith, in my walk with Jesus Christ. Find someone like that, identify that person, and then on the flip side, be that person for someone else. Realize that there are people around you that are struggling. Realize we walk in church and everybody's smiling, and you ask the question, "Hey, how are you doing?" And good, good. Everybody says good, 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 good. And you might have that one person who, yeah, it's okay. But how many of those goods they would really like to say, "It's been an awful week. It's been hard." If they would just be honest, or we would just give them the opportunity to. So realize there's people all around you who don't have it all together, and they're possibly struggling or hurting on the inside. Their faith is weak. And guess what? They need your faith. They need to borrow your faith just to get through one more day. So when your faith is strong, work hard at being this, an encourager. When yours is weak, find that person. Try to grab a hold of their faith just to keep yourself going. That's okay. But when your faith is strong, be an encourager and find ways you can encourage and strengthen and be that person for somebody else. You see, you and I could be the difference of someone being able to take their next step, or that person that you and I have surrounded ourselves with could be the difference of you and I taking our next step or falling many steps backwards.